All right. So, there's been a lot of buzz recently about that Korean AI chip startup, Furiosa AI, possibly being acquired by a company, outside of Korea, right?
Mm.
And it got me thinking. And that's what kind of sparked today's deep dive. We're going to use this whole Furiosa AI thing as a starting point to tackle a much bigger question. Now, how could a country like Korea support its startups in a way that actually benefits, everybody?
Yeah, that's a great question.
And we're going to explore this through a really thought-provoking article from a Korean publication. The title is AI, yes, Yek. And for those of you who don't speak Korean, that translates to government-led AI investment, a sustainable growth model.
Yeah, and it's a model that suggests a pretty big shift in thinking, really, moving away from the traditional approach of just giving startups subsidies and towards something much more strategic, a state-led investment model.
Ooh, state-led investment. Okay. You've got my attention. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, so to speak, let's take a step back.
Yeah.
What's the problem with the way governments typically support startups now? Why isn't just giving them money enough?
Well, that's the key question, isn't it? I mean, the article makes a really strong case that simply relying on subsidies is kind of like building a house on sand. It's just not sustainable in the long run. Think about it. Even when startups do succeed with the help of subsidies, there's no guarantee that the public will actually see any kind of direct benefit.
Okay, I'm starting to see the issue here. Let's bring it back to that Furiosa AI example. Let's say they become the next big thing, right, in AI chips. If a foreign company just comes in and buys them, does Korea really reap the rewards of all their success?
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's where the state-led investment model gets really interesting. The core idea is, instead of just handing out these subsidies, the government becomes a strategic investor, right? They take an equity stake in these promising startups.
So it's like the government is taking on the role of a venture capitalist.
Exactly.
That's a bold move.
It is. And the article points to some really compelling examples of this approach actually working in other countries. For instance, you have Temasek Holdings in Singapore. They've had incredible success using this model to build a really robust and diverse portfolio of companies. And then there's Norway's government pension fund Global, which has generated some pretty impressive returns for the Norwegian people by investing in a wide range of assets, including startups.
So instead of just, hoping that throwing money at startups will lead to good things, the government's actually participating in their growth and sharing in their success. I'm starting to see the appeal here, but I'm guessing it's not quite as simple as just, writing a bunch of checks, right?
Right. You're absolutely right. The article acknowledges that there are some significant challenges that need to be carefully considered, and we'll delve into those, next.
So we've talked about how just handing out subsidies to startups, might not be the best way to go. And this whole idea of the government becoming a strategic investor, taking equity stake in startups,
Yeah.
definitely got me thinking. But as you mentioned, there are some potential challenges. What are some of the big ones that this article highlights?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is the risk of political interference. You can imagine a scenario where the government starts favoring companies from certain regions or industries. Even if those aren't necessarily the most promising investments, that could create a really, really unfair playing field and undermine the whole purpose of this model.
Yeah, that's a valid concern.
Yeah.
I mean, governments aren't exactly known for being, immune to political pressure. So how does the article propose to address this issue of political interference?
Well, they suggest a solution that's modeled after a real-world success story. Temasek Holdings in Singapore, they proposed creating a truly independent national investment fund, similar to Temasek, that would operate, at arm's length from the government, really minimizing political influence and maximizing the potential for smart, objective investment decisions.
Okay, so keep the politicians out of the investment decisions and let the experts focus on picking the most promising startups. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But what about the public? How do you prevent a potential, backlash if some of these investments don't pan out? I mean, people get pretty upset when they feel like their tax dollars are being wasted, especially on risky ventures.
Yeah, no, that's another really crucial point that the article addresses too. To mitigate the risk of that kind of public backlash, they recommend a two-pronged approach, right? First, diversify the investment portfolio to spread the risk. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. And second, ensure complete transparency so that that citizens can actually track the fund's performance.
Okay, so it's like a public dashboard where anyone can see exactly where the money's going and how those investments are doing. It would definitely help to build, trust and accountability.
Exactly. Transparency is key to gaining public support for any government initiative, really.
Yeah.
Especially one that involves, investing public funds.
Right. Now, let's bring this back to the Furious AI situation. We talked about the potential benefits of state-led investment for Korean startups, but what about the flip side? What happens if a company, even after receiving this government support, ends up getting acquired by a foreign entity? How do you make sure that Korea still benefits?
Yeah, that's a critical question. And the article proposes some specific safeguards to address that very concern. For example, even in the case of an overseas acquisition, the government could retain a stake in the company, ensuring that Korea continues to benefit from its, future success.
So it's not an all or nothing situation. Even if a foreign company comes in, Korea would still have a seat at the table, so to speak.
Precisely. And the article goes even further, suggesting that agreements be put in place, mandating continued research and development, operations within Korea, even after an acquisition.
So keeping the knowledge and the innovation flowing within Korea.
Exactly. And, these agreements could also ensure continued collaboration with Korean partners, creating kind of a ripple effect of benefits throughout the Korean economy.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful way to prevent a brain drain, right? Where all the talent and expertise end up leaving the country. Okay, I'm really starting to see how this state-led investment model could be a real game changer for Korean startups and the country as a whole. But I'm curious, are there any real-world examples of this kind of public-private partnership actually working?
Yeah, absolutely. The article actually highlights a really interesting example, the Daejeong-dong Urban Development Project in Sonam City. Now, this wasn't a startup investment, but it demonstrates the principles of this model in action. Sonam City wanted to undertake this really ambitious urban development project, but they couldn't fully fund it on their own. So they formed a partnership with private investors, creating what's called a public-private co-investment model.
So it's like a joint venture, where both the public and private sectors, bring something to the table.
Exactly. Yeah. And the results were pretty impressive. Not only did the project generate over 550 billion Korean won in public profit, but it also allowed the private businesses involved to thrive. It was a true win-win situation.
Okay, that's a compelling example. Yeah. But how would this kind of co-investment model translate to the startup world? I mean, developing real estate is one thing, but investing in risky startups is a whole different ballgame.
Right. You bring up a good point, and the article actually addresses this directly. They propose a similar model for funding startups, specifically in fields like AI and semiconductors. So picture this, right? Yeah. A government-backed fund specifically designed to support these cutting-edge startups, but it's co-financed with private venture capital.
So you've got the government's, strategic vision and resources combined with the agility and market savvy of the private sector. It sounds like a pretty powerful combination.
It does, but of course, like any model, it has its potential downsides.
Okay, let's talk about those downsides. What are some of the risks that the article highlights?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is the risk of, private companies reaping excessive profits while the public return is limited.
So it's about finding the right balance, right? Making sure that both the public and private sectors are getting a fair share of the rewards.
Exactly. And there's also the danger of, bureaucratic inefficiency. If the government gets too involved in the day-to-day operations of the fund, it could really slow things down and stifle innovation.
Right. So it's a delicate dance. You need to find that sweet spot where the public and private sectors can work together effectively without, stepping on each other's toes.
Precisely. And the article stresses the importance of, careful oversight and a well-structured investment model to navigate these complexities.
Okay, so we've got this idea of a public-private co-investment fund. But the article doesn't stop there, does it? They actually propose some pretty concrete steps for putting this whole state-led funding model into action.
They do, and that's where it gets even more interesting.
All right, I'm ready for the specifics.
Right.
What are some of the key actions they recommend?
Well, first, they propose establishing a National Innovation Startup Fund.
I love the name. It sounds bold and ambitious. But what exactly would this fund do?
This fund would be laser focused on what they call key industries of the future. Things like AI, semiconductors, biotechnology, aerospace, green energy.
Okay, those are some pretty big swings. And how would this fund be financed? Would it all come from the government?
Well, the idea is for it to be co-financed with the government contributing 50% and the private sector matching that 50%.
So shared responsibility and shared governance. I like it.
Right. And there's another important element. Even if a company funded by this initiative is later sold to a foreign entity, the government would retain a portion of its equity.
Okay, so that helps prevent that brain drain we talked about earlier, where the innovation and the profits essentially leave the country.
Exactly. But wait, there's more. The article also proposes something called a Public Startup Stock Fund.
Ooh, that sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
This fund would allow everyday citizens to own shares in startups that are backed by this government investment.
So not just the big time investors get to play. I love that. It's a chance for everyone to potentially benefit from these groundbreaking companies.
Exactly. The idea is to kind of democratize access to these potentially lucrative investments. National pension funds and other public investment institutions would also participate, ensuring that the returns are shared broadly.
So it's almost like a crowdsourcing approach to nation building.
It is. It allows citizens to directly participate in and benefit from the growth of these cutting edge companies.
Okay, this is all incredibly exciting. But I have to ask, is this just a pie in the sky idea, or are there concrete ways to actually implement these proposals?
Well, that's where the article gets even more granular. They delve into specific conditions that could be attached to overseas acquisitions to ensure that Korea's interests are protected. For example, any foreign buyer would be required to maintain research and development partnerships with Korean universities and research centers.
So keeping the knowledge and innovation, flowing within Korea.
Exactly. And even more importantly, the research and development headquarters and core technology development would have to remain in Korea.
That's a big deal. It prevents that hollowing out of the industry, where the heart of the operation moves elsewhere.
Exactly, and there would also be contractual obligations to ensure ongoing collaboration with Korean suppliers, even after an acquisition.
So it's a very holistic approach.
Yeah.
Considering all the angles and potential pitfalls, I'm impressed with the level of detail and thought that has gone into these proposals.
Me too. It's clear that the authors of this article have really thought through the complexities of this issue.
They have, but even with all these safeguards in place, this whole idea of state-led investment still feels pretty bold, even radical. What do you think? Is it realistic to think that this could actually work?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? The article lays out a compelling vision, but putting it into practice would undoubtedly involve a lot of complex policy decisions and of course political will.
Right. There's always that gap between a good idea on paper and actually making it work in the real world. But I have to say, I'm pretty intrigued by this whole concept. It's like we've stumbled onto a whole new way of thinking about the relationship between government and the private sector, especially when it comes to fostering innovation.
I agree. It really challenges a lot of our assumptions about how these things
should work. It does. Like we're so used to this narrative of government being the regulator. The rule setter, maybe even a bit of a roadblock to innovation sometimes. But this model flips that script completely.
It does. It reimagines the government as an active participant, a collaborator, even a catalyst for innovation.
Yeah, and what I find particularly exciting is that it's not just about the government picking winners and losers. It's about creating a system a framework where the public and private sectors can work together to achieve shared goals.
Exactly. It's about leveraging the strengths of both sides. You have the government's long-term vision, its ability to mobilize resources, and its focus on the greater good. And then you have, the private sector's agility. It's market savvy and its drive for results.
It sounds like a power couple of innovation.
It is. And when you combine those forces in a strategic and thoughtful way, the potential for positive impact is enormous.
I'm with you on that. But let's get real for a second. This whole concept of state-led investment, it sounds great in theory, but are there any real-world examples of it actually working? It's funny, when we first started talking about this whole state-led investment idea, I thought it was going to be like, purely theoretical. But as we've kind of dug deeper, I'm seeing how these concepts could actually translate into real change. Yeah,
I think that's one of the most exciting things about these kinds of conversations. Sometimes we get so caught up in the abstract that we forget about the real world implications of these ideas.
Totally, yeah. And for me, one of the biggest takeaways is that we need to be like way bolder in our thinking about how we support innovation. It's not enough to just, tweak the edges of existing systems. We might need to completely reimagine the role that government plays in fostering, a truly thriving and beneficial innovation ecosystem.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's about having the courage to question those long-held assumptions and to really explore those new possibilities. And sometimes those new possibilities might seem, a bit radical at first.
They might, yeah. But think about it. What if this idea of the government becoming like a strategic investor, actually taking equity stakes in promising startups? What if that actually becomes the norm? What if it's no longer seen as this fringe idea, but as a common sense approach to supporting innovation and ensuring that everyone benefits from its success?
That's a really interesting thought. I mean, it would fundamentally shift the power dynamics between the public and private sectors, right? And it could potentially lead to a much more collaborative and equitable approach to economic growth.
Exactly. It's like we're on the cusp of a paradigm shift, a whole new way of thinking about how we create a more prosperous and sustainable future.
Yeah.
And it's not just about Korea either, right? This model has the potential to be applied in countries all over the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, the challenges we're facing, climate change, income inequality, the need for sustainable development, these are global challenges, and they're going to require global solutions.
And those solutions are going to require massive investments in innovation, right? Investments that might not come solely from the private sector. We might need governments to step up and play a more active role.
Yeah, I think that's a really crucial point, because sometimes the private sector is hesitant to take on the risks associated with truly groundbreaking innovation, especially when the potential payoffs are, years or even decades down the road.
Right, and that's where governments can step in and provide that long-term vision and patient capital. They can invest in those moonshot ideas. That might seem too risky for private investors, but that have the potential to really change the world.
Yeah, exactly. Think about the early days of the internet, for example. The initial investments in developing the underlying technology came largely from the government, and without that early support, who knows if the internet would have ever become the transformative force that it is today.
Yeah, that's such a great point. It makes you wonder what other kind of big world-changing innovations might be just around the corner if governments were willing to take on a more active role as investors.
Well, I mean, we've already touched on a few, right? Artificial intelligence, biotechnology, renewable energy. These are all areas where massive breakthroughs are possible, but where the risks are also, quite high. And there are countless others. I mean, from space exploration to quantum computing to personalized medicine.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing to think about the possibilities. But as we've discussed, there are also, potential downsides to this approach. We need to be aware of the risks of, political interference, bureaucratic inefficiency, and even the possibility of private companies, exploiting the system.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to have, strong safeguards in place. Like that independent investment fund modeled after Temasek, the transparency measures to keep the public informed, and those contractual obligations for foreign companies that acquire, government-supported startups.
Right. And perhaps even more importantly, we need to have really open and honest conversations about the goals of this model. You know, what are we actually trying to achieve here? Is it simply about, maximizing economic growth, or is it about creating a more equitable and sustainable future for everyone?
That's a question that every society needs to grapple with, because ultimately the success of this model hinges on a shared vision, right? A commitment to working together to achieve common goals.
And that requires trust, right? Trust between the government and the private sector, trust between policymakers and the public, and trust between nations as we work together to address these global challenges.
Absolutely.
It's a complex equation, but I think we're starting to see the pieces come together.
Neat.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I can't help but feel a sense of optimism. Because even though the challenges are immense, it's inspiring to see people thinking creatively and courageously about how we can build a better future.
I share your optimism, and I think the fact that we're even having this conversation is a sign that things are moving in the right direction.
Yeah, it is. So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to continue exploring these ideas, challenge the status quo, ask tough questions, and imagine a world where innovation benefits everyone. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of state-led investment.
It's been a pleasure. Until next time.